Let us welcome the entire panel to the stage. Thank you. Now, we've just heard a really interesting conversation on desiccation, plants living without water. Any comments from y'all before you do your gigs? Any comments? Matthias, I'm going to ask you. Go first.
Yes, I just want to say I loved your visual, making this urgent call to bridge between the silos in academia. And I want to say even perhaps beyond academia. This very much resonates also with my work on a very controversial subject, more on that later. But this is such a fundamental call, and I want to perhaps ask you if you could say in a few words, what would that look like if you were to give recommendations, for example, to research funders, research program designers, etc.?
Yeah, so I believe that research funders should, and are already starting to do this, but to fund larger institutes and center grants that bring together diverse scientists across disciplines, but also funding opportunities that, as you mentioned, span and extend beyond science and beyond national boundaries. So most of the funding in the US, at least that I've been lucky enough to have, is restricted to research that happens within our own country. And so expanding, breaking down some of those borders and making more inclusive grants that go beyond science and a simple discipline and beyond national borders would be a place to start.
That's great. I think I saw lots of heads going there, hey, give us the money, give us the money, big money, that's okay. So Aisha, you look like you want to say something, so I'm going to ask you to go ahead and go.
Absolutely, Matthias, you got the question right out of my mouth. The same thing. So that's sort of breaking down silos and including the Global South in the discourse. So I would also like to point at the fact that the scientists also, as the research is going, need to begin to discuss with policymakers so that that anticipation is already happening, so that when the technology is here and it's viable and it's commercially available, the policy element kicks in, and we don't need to start going back all the way.
I think that's really supporting the fundamentals of the SDA, Science and Diplomacy Anticipators. So I really appreciate that. Do you mind if I'm going to ask, do you want to add something, sir?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think the most visible impact of climate change is on plant growth. I gave 4 examples. Sakura is happening 2 weeks earlier than 10 years ago. Price of olive oil has doubled, price of coffee has doubled, and the wine growing region has expanded, and you get more sugar, right? But this aside, humanity depends on 4 major crops: corn, wheat, rice, and soybean, for about 80% of our caloric input. And these plants with global warming is going to be confronted and challenged with abiotic stresses, non-biotic stresses, the kind that Rose described. Yeah. And I think the pathway that she and her colleagues are investigating, plus other labs are investigating, should be applied to crop plants so that we enable them to be more resilient going forward. And this will be part of our solution for food security.
So you're anticipating changes and thinking about how science can help us with that right now. Right. This is really great. So Aisha, share a little bit about your top-of-mind issues are and what you're doing and with the group here, please.
All right. So top of mind and what I'm doing is really around bringing research and innovation to the people that need it the most. So where I come from, sub-Saharan Africa, and in certain parts of Central America, and also South Asia, what we're seeing more and more of is an increase in the production areas that are no longer sustainable. We're also seeing an increase in the number of people that are food and nutrition insecure. And then we're, again, seeing erratic patterns of diseases, pests, all that culminating into a very problematic narrative between policy for food security and then climate actions. Almost as if we push for regenerative agroecological practices, we run the risk of reducing productivity and then putting more people in food insecurity. So how do we go around about that? So that is where it is important for the science to then harness and come at it in a way that we are redefining ecosystems. I'd like to give a very quick example where I'm from, a community where is insurgency endemic. It has been for about a decade. And sorghum is a plant that farmers really planted, and that sort of ties in with what Nam said. Only 4 groups where humanity is dependent on. Maybe it's time we begin to push for more staple products that are different from those 4. Anyway, going back to the story. So farmers stopped planting sorghum because it grows well over 5 feet tall. That's because the insurgents can hide in there and then attack communities. Scientists came up with a dwarf variety. Now, there are other dwarf varieties, but this one was engineered so that it can withstand the harsh conditions. So because it's compact and smaller, it uses less resources, less input, less water. And then it's early maturing. So it's shorter, so you can really see around your environment, and you're able to, so sorghum is gradually coming back into this community. So that is one. Other applications that we are seeing is around synthetic biology for enhanced soil health. So how do we begin to introduce microbes that can adapt quickly to the changing climate and the changing soil environment to be able to, whether it is in pathogen suppression or nitrogen fixation or carbon sequestration, how can we be able to do that? And an important one thereof is the use of pesticides. 80% of the food that we consume in my region is produced by smallholder producers. It's very difficult to not police, that's the wrong word, to control. Thank you very much.
Keep an eye on, some of the...
It's very difficult to sort of control how we indiscriminately use pesticides. So one way of going around this is introducing biopesticides. Now, I understand in my lifetime, we would probably not see a 100% shift from chemical to bio, but we can do a hybrid situation whereby in these areas we reduce the use of pesticides and then we have a more balanced ecosystem.
That's great. Thank you for that. It's really interesting, especially when you said with the reality of the crop.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a very important thing for us to remember. There's not just one thing that matters.
Exactly, and that's an example of how it's not just the science and the technology behind it, it's also taking cognizance of the social situation around and designing for that as well.
Which is the plea for this big molecule which you showed before with the multiple typologies.
And that's very important, Rose, getting back to you, to come back to that integration of the Global South, because contextualization is very important.
That's great.
When the research and production is closer to the users, then it allows for more ideas on how to design it to suit better.
Great. Thank you. Matthias, I want to go to you now, because you're on a different scale. We're down into crops. You're up in the sky, right? Tell us a little bit of what's on your mind and what's relevant for this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I want to just reinforce your point just now in that it equally applies to the topic that I'm looking at, which is indeed this idea that the cooling that ship tracks have generated in the past, which we are actually taking away, the idea being, could we intentionally alter the climate by taking that sulfur, which is extremely harmful for human health, where it is in the troposphere, in the lower atmosphere, putting that in the upper atmosphere to actually have that same cooling effect, given the urgency of climate change not only knocking on our doors, but actually breaking down doors and threatening food security along the way. So in that context, and in the context of significant risk, which is extremely hard to pinpoint, that things happen such as the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, AMOC, which brings balmy temperatures to the shores of Europe, that potentially halting within our lifetime has been put at 10% probability, and this clearly would disrupt food systems, not only in Europe, plunging Northern Europe and the UK into Arctic temperatures, but also the Sahel, having drying effect on the Sahel, and devastating effects, most likely, but really not quite well known, in other parts of the world, including on food production. So that's the backdrop.
Yeah.
And the questions that I'm faced with are, how do we empower researchers around the globe, indeed, to have this conversation. What would this look like? What would this mean, given that we have this conversation really at the global, at the very abstract level, which is so hard to pinpoint then how to bring that down and really root it in the local understanding of what matters, what climate aspects matter regionally, both for food production, but human health and just human security overall. So that's a huge challenge, and we've barely scratched the surface on this, but it very much resonates with what we've just heard now.
And what you're saying there is a bit about anticipating. One can have an opinion about what if we wish to do this or not, but to anticipate the potential impacts one way or another, and to really begin, as you said, there's a 10% chance of that flipping. If you would have asked probably 25, 30 years ago, they would have said never a chance. You know, so maybe this keeps changing, so as our context changes. But you mentioned something also about climate and tipping points. And because you didn't mention that here, because you're in Brussels, and your role there is thinking about these big space-based. We've talked about desiccation plants. Tell us, what do you see with the tipping points? I'm going to come to you next, sir, but not quite yet. But tipping points, and how do you see that?
Yeah, so basically, if, for example, taking this example, the Atlantic circulation were to stop entirely, it is already slowing. It has been slowing for 20 years, approximately, as far as I can tell. And we don't have very strong evidence exactly to pinpoint how probable and when. But it is a very uncomfortable probability given the stakes. So that's just one example of a tipping point. Others are, which we already also see the signs of, a destabilizing polar air mass system with the jet stream moving further south, bringing polar temperatures to Texas, to the south of Europe, to other parts of the world equally, and disrupting energy systems, disrupting food production as well. So those are some of the concerns, very hard to pinpoint, and that makes it a very challenging conversation for policy because we need more specific numbers, more clear scenarios to actually talk about it concretely.
Great, thank you for that. I think that's the point. We need more data. We need more information. We need to understand that a little bit more. Namhai, you mentioned one thing that was on the top of your mind, but what's else on your mind when it comes to the theme today of climate resilience and food security?
Well, I think when we talk about food security, in general, the conventional view is that as long as you have enough food to eat, when you have enough calorie intake, then you're okay. But this conventional assumption is slightly incorrect because what we need are two types of nutrients. We have macronutrients, which is starch, carbohydrate, protein, and lipids that provide you with the caloric values. But on top of this, for normal human development, you need microelements, which is vitamins, all sorts of vitamins, A, B, C, and so on, and metals, right, like iron, zinc, iodine, so on and so forth. There's a whole list. Now, in the developed world, since the advent of multivitamins and the addition of iodine into salt, much of these micronutrient deficiencies have disappeared. I mean, occasionally you see stories about a kid in the US eating potato chips all the time and got blind in the end, right? Now, but for the global south that we are talking about, food security should include an element of nutrition, and in particular, precision nutrition, right? Keeping in mind the genetic differences and the food preferences of different groups. Now, the deficiency of vitamins and minerals are quite serious in global south, and it's something that we who live in the developed world may not be aware. So I will give simply two examples. One example on the mineral and another example on vitamins. So iron deficiency among the minerals, iron deficiency is a very serious issue in developing world. And this kind of deficiency causes, has transgeneration effect, right? Because when you have a mother pregnant with babies, there's something called the golden window. It's 1,000 days after conception or birth. So basically from the trimester to age 2, this is a period when your brain grows, and you need two things. You need nutrition for the brain, and you need stimulation to get more neurons working. Now, if you have iron deficiency, then brain development is retarded, and child born will be underdeveloped, will be stunted, and that also affects their IQ later on. So it has a transgeneration effect. And from what I've read, about 150 million people in the developing world suffer from anemia, iron deficiency, which I will talk about mitigation later. I'll talk about the problem statement.
Well, we're going to run out of time here. There's not much later now, so we're going to keep it really tight now.
Okay. So the second issue is vitamin A deficiency. It kills about 1 million, people a year, and 500,000 children are blind or near blind, and a simple addition of vitamin A will ameliorate this situation. So mitigation, well, for iron, I think that, you have a couple of strategies. You can eat, more, of course you can eat more meat, but, the issue of meat is not enough, right? Yeah. So one possibility is to eat fermented food, which has fungal, that uses fungus in it, that accumulates, different sorts of minerals, right? And the same thing, the same solution for vitamin A deficiency. Well, another way is to use GMO technology, which is a little bit controversial in Europe, although approved elsewhere in the developed world. And a very clear example was the golden rice, which was developed 24 years ago with rice fortified with vitamin A, but to this day has not been approved.
Yeah. Well, we heard the GMO. I mean, this is Aisha. I'm going to come back to you for a moment, if again, then Rose, I'm going to come to you. You also, in your resume, have a couple of really interesting activities which you're doing. One of those is the gender-responsive agricultural systems. And we're looking to the future and anticipating the changes which we need to see. Tell us a little bit about that in that lens.
Okay, so gender-responsive agricultural systems. Women have different needs than men. And the lower down the equator you go, the more pronounced that actually becomes. And quite often, where we have national food security policies and strategies, if they don't take into account the social dynamics of food access and distribution, it doesn't translate into individual food security. So there's that aspect of it. But secondly, globally, only about 15% of women are land owners. Women operate less capitalized firms. If you go down to the farm level, women use less inputs, especially where I'm from on the farm, which means they produce less, which means they earn less. So this particular initiative you're referring to is actually designed in order to get more women voices and women-allied voices into the policy sector, so that we begin to understand the different nuances that, because women are not a monolith, from region to region it's different, and even within communities, there are subtle differences that we need to understand, we need to acknowledge, and then we also need to design for. So that is why that is particularly important. And closely linked to that initiative is also Leading African Women in Food Fellowship, which exists solely to highlight and celebrate what women are doing in Africa. Because it is only when you see, and it has been projected, that you can begin to emulate, and then you can begin to incorporate the future thinking of that as well.
I think it's really interesting because I'm looking behind you at the letters of GESDA. I'm seeing Rose nodding her head, but I always think of diplomacy can have a big D or a little d. The little d is what you're talking about in my mind, which is around policy, which is about dialogue, which is about understanding how to make the rules of the game so that it really empowers.
Equitable.
Right, and equitable. And this is really what you're talking here, the need for this kind of understanding of diplomacy, policy making globally that can be translated.
Absolutely.
Is that right? Yeah. And Rose, you were vigorously nodding your head down there. So So we can talk about that, but I also want to, I'm quite fascinated by you saying plants going into suspension with the bioglass is a really fascinating presentation. Now, I want you to, you gave a great look out, say 5, 10, 20 years. So when it comes to this typology of plant and the research is going on, if you could wave a magic wand from an anticipation standpoint, what would you say we need to do next in order to help springboard us forward for the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Well, I could
answer. And it can't be just more money, okay? That's not good enough, right?
No, I could answer that question in a lot of ways. I think there's quite a few roadblocks or challenges that we should address. So in terms of the biotechnology aspects as it pertains to resurrection plants and desiccation tolerance, a huge bottleneck is plant transformation, which is notoriously difficult, especially in non-model systems. And it's also not a problem that individual labs can tackle very well. So the development of centers that are funded to address this issue, I think, could really revolutionize how we can apply genetic modification and bring it to the market. But I also think there are important and maybe less technical and more immediate interventions that could be made. So one of the points that's been brought up by Nam and Aisha already is sort of the restriction of the crops that we grow and this monoculture system. But there are, in fact, many diverse crops that humans used to eat and are still actually farmed and cultivated on small scales in a regional context. We call these underutilized crops, or they used to be called orphan crops, but they're not really orphans. So investing in improving systems for farming these and through traditional breeding to bring some of these underutilized crops to the market and into production could address nutritional, a lot of these crops are more tolerant to abiotic stresses, they can be more nutritious, and they will diversify our agroecosystems, which can help prevent against some of these ecological consequences that we see from monocropping. But I also think that, to make, and I think I've already made this point in my presentation, but in order for these interventions to be successful, they really need to be informed by the local context and the local people. And I think as a whole organization, science is done we just have a lot of room to improve in that area. So not only is most of the scientific literature and funding produced and generated in the global north, but even when we're doing research in the global south, it's often led by researchers from the global north, and oftentimes not in a very inclusive way, where the local people are not involved in a real sense in this research, and that means that many of the things we develop may not be adopted locally, to Aisha's point, where we don't understand the local context, and so even if we engineer beautiful desiccation-tolerant sorghum, if it's too tall to be grown in a war zone, then it will never be applied. So I really think connecting with the local context in the places that are climate insecure should be our first priority.
As was said in a film, location, location, location. Don't forget. We have to remember that again and again and again. That's really, thank you for that. Now, it's your chance to ask some questions here. I can't see you very well because we have the house lights up just a little bit. This is great. We have lots of hands. Here's one popped up here, here, and here. So here's some microphones. Do we have a mic runner, or do I need to run? Here we go. So let's go here first, and then put your hands back up, because I like to have a one right. We're over here really desperate. She's desperate, okay? So you're going to be next, so we're all going to do something. So short question, please.
How do you explain that the global north has this huge discussion about the feasibility of meddling with the crop generation and transforming that? In Switzerland, we are prohibited to research anything. Why is that so?
So, who wants to go for it?
Are we taking all questions? Or can
you go for one. We're going to do one at a time. Go ahead.
Okay.
You can. I think it's aimed at you. Yes.
Thank you for the question. And a lot of what you just said echoed yesterday, and it's really around trust, 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 and trust. And that's what the discussion with GMO is. And there is a lot of capacity building and awareness that needs to be raised regarding these different organisms that we are working with. But part of it, including the trust, is that we also need to develop or articulate better strategies and policies that will govern and safeguard the use of these organisms so that people are rest assured that this is not going to get out of hand and we don't know what to do next in the next 10 years. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's right along the way of why we are thinking about it anyway while we're working. It needs to go along with the users.
Yeah, there's the author, Steve Covey, kind of family, says change happens at the rate of trust or the speed of trust. Maybe that's what you're pointing out, is trust is an incredibly important thing, where again, diplomacy is again around trying to build trust between groups, which is why we're all sitting here trying to create the kind of capability to have a conversation. Looks like you guys wanted to answer that a little bit as well. Go ahead.
If I may jump in on this issue of trust, because it very strongly resonates in my field as well, and perhaps to say something about the value of scientific research and linking that into international assessments, in particular on areas where there are expectations of larger scale effects, even when we understand at the cellular level what might happen. In my case, when we understand what might happen at the global level, we vice versa need to understand what happens at the regional level. So those connections between the local and the global are equally important and can actually serve as important catalysts for building that trust also towards international negotiations, making things more transparent, accessible, and thereby empowering global decision-making.
I think very often with that perception, unfortunately, sometimes perception trumps reality. Oh, I hate using that word, sorry. Perception overcomes sort of reality very often. This, I think, in here is this. Okay, we have a question over here, and who's going to be up next? Then there was one back there, sorry, the woman back here on the left. I see you here next, and then you're over here, yep.
Hi, thank you. Elaine Franz from Flow in Action. This is a question for Aisha and Rose. Brilliant that you're getting women's voices connected to policymakers, particularly as women most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and women as agri-entrepreneurs. How are you making that link going forward to educators, entrepreneurial education programs to build that knowledge so the pipeline starts early or earlier? How are you bridging that gap?
Thank you. Go. Aisha, okay. you A and then R. You know, so
all right,
okay,
thanks. So with that question and that conversation, one is really the push to make sure that the conversation around climate resilience, food security, and gender responsiveness is on the agenda of every global food systems conversation. So we have to start talking about it and including the trust aspect of things going forward. There are a lot of research that never made it out of the lab, simply because it is too expensive to survive out in the wild. So part of the work that I do is working with researchers, working with policymakers, businesses, and philanthropic organizations to see how can we create a business model that makes sense for the users. It doesn't always work, but we have to keep pushing, and sometimes we need that philanthropic boost in order to get it started, create a proof of concept, then the private sector money starts coming in. So it is in that design that we have to make sure those voices are heard. It is in that conceptualization phase that we have to make sure that we are designing for all involved.
And it's also, I guess, getting a vocabulary into the ecosystem.
That's necessary.
Which is also trying to create a common method of dialoguing about what needs to come.
That is absolutely necessary. Yeah. And beyond the sort of gender-responsive dialogue, we have to also infuse the nutrition aspect of it. Because countries are grappling with immediate food insecurity, the long-term thinking of it is somewhat shelved behind because we need to deal with this crisis at the moment. But we shouldn't just be producing more food for the purpose of more food. It needs to be nutritious food. It needs to be food that is safe.
And perhaps has some of the micro elements that were no longer, or thought out of it, right? And designed out of it. Rose, did you want to answer this as well? And then we're going to keep going.
I can take a stab at it, but I have to admit that it's a little bit outside of my area of expertise. So I'm a scientist that works in a lab, and so I'm not really in the space of policy and public relations. But I do think that if we want to get engagement from broader groups of people, from people who've been historically excluded or marginalized from these conversations, it comes down to providing opportunity and support for these communities. So education opportunities for women early in life. And yeah, I mean, my experience, I've worked in South Africa quite extensively, and one of the things that really struck me is even in higher education, there are very few positions for those students who would like to go on to pursue a career in research or higher education. And it's not for lack of brilliance and intelligence. There's many very motivated, brilliant people in these spaces, but they just have very few positions. So I think as folks from the global north, if we could take the lead in trying to provide these opportunities for people in less privileged situations, that would be really important work to do.
Okay, thank you. We have another question in the back here.
I'm here, actually.
Yeah.
The other side of the room. Here.
This side of first, and then come back to you.
Okay, sorry.
Just a sec, yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot for a very interesting presentation. The past discussions have been basically on crops from land. We also know there are crops from the ocean, seaweed farming. What role do you think will have that in the future? So crops from the ocean, also considering climate resilience, and also that crops from the ocean deal less, for example, with
thank you. Good question.
Dryness.
Ocean-based. Do we have any expertise or opinions on ocean-based? No, don't laugh. This is a serious one. Come on. I'm serious. You know, seaweed, kelp.
Yeah, I mean, I think providing enough, macro element source is not an issue. But you also have to consider people's eating habit, right? For example, let me give you a very simple example. Like much of Africa is using rice as a base for carbohydrate. And there's no point giving them a lot of flour, right? Wheat flour. So I think that even though we can harvest large amount of seaweeds from the ocean, right now it has been used just for industrial purposes. You isolate carrageen in there, from there and put into your food jam or things like that. But as a major source of food, it will take time.
Well, it's a big source right now, but I'm going to take that away as, you're right, we're land-based up here, and we'll take that away for next year. Mm-hmm. We'll make sure we have a very, a fishy conversation, a green conversation, a blue conversation. We're going to have the mic come down to here, you're next, and then you're next, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. Sorry for the earlier confusion. My name is Lauriane Trimoula. I work for the Gallifrey Foundation, and I have a question related to the AMOC topic. And if I understood correctly, you said that more data was needed, there was not enough science, etc. Shouldn't we apply the precautionary principle? Because I would like to remind that the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea has released earlier this year an advisory opinion that ocean protection is now a state obligation of due diligence, and that not the latest science is needed to apply precautionary principle. The role of the ocean currently is such that it absorbs the equivalent of 8 Hiroshima bombs per second in terms of energy. Without this, the average temperature would be 50 degrees, 50, and not 15 degrees as it is at the moment. So talking about climate resilience and food security, maybe we should start protecting the ocean in the first place. And I'm still interested in the precautionary principle question. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. I very much appreciate your question on that, because I'm afraid I cut my remarks quite short, and I would have expanded to say the lack of precise probabilities on the issue of what happens in the Earth systems, including in particular in the oceans, cannot mean inaction. So I want to really emphasize and bring that home, what it means when it comes to directly intervening in the climate system, directly cooling the atmosphere through so-called solar geoengineering or solar radiation modification is a very big question, and it's not predetermined by that need for proactive measures. But it does come up, I think, in this context as well, that we need to ask ourselves, can we study whether or not we could cool rapidly, given this inertia in the system that I think you also highlight, and the sheer amount of energy that the atmosphere has been and keeps on absorbing due to our anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a huge question. How to apply precaution in this situation, I don't know, but I think it needs to be asked.
Good question. Thank you. Great question. Nam?
So in yesterday's morning session, someone was talking about policy and science. And I think that we will come to, in fact, we have already passed the stage of policy has not caught up with progress. And you mentioned about precautionary principle. I suppose you're referring to the Cartagena Protocol, right? Principle 15 deals with GMO. If we are going to benefit from all the work that Rose has described and other laboratories have described and transfer them into improving crops, one solution is to use GMO, right? But right now, because of Principle 15, Cartagena Protocol, GMO, because of the precautionary principle, GMO is not allowed in Europe. And Global South has not been able to benefit from GMO, all the benefits that can bring about by technology. So I think that the Europeans have to think about, whether it is time to rethink about policy.
Ooh, we'll put that right there in the middle of the floor. I'll just kind of let that sit for a moment. Climate resilience and food security. Sir. Yep.
I'm Jean Fremont. I've worked for 20 years with Jimmy Carter and Norman Borlaug with smallholder farmers in Africa. My question is, how far are you from scaling up? It's one of the most fascinating panel I heard for the last probably 30 to 40 years. And you're close to scaling up. It's clear with Aisha. Aisha, you're very close to scaling up. My question would be to Rose, because you're in R&D, and you have to test R&D locally. How far are you from getting results which can be transferred to the smallholder farmers?
Great question. I think it depends on the intervention that we're talking about. So some of the work with the microbiome, developing these biostimulants and inoculants derived from resurrection plant microbes, could come to market and be applied to farmers both small and large within the next 5 years, right? These are easier technologies. But in terms of genetically engineering desiccation-tolerant crops, I'm afraid to say I think we're a bit further off. This would be more in the 10 to 15 to 20-year scale, just because there's so many genes involved in desiccation tolerance. So even if we take a very targeted GMO approach, we're still trying individual genes piecemeal, and what we find is that often we can improve stress tolerance when we insert these resurrection genes into a crop, but it usually comes with a pretty severe trade-off in terms of growth and productivity. So breaking that link is still a major challenge. And so, yeah, I think we're a bit further away from that application.
Thank you for that, Rose. Very interesting. I think, when you were talking and describing some of these, I was thinking of the recent movie Dune, right? And there's like the desertification and so many places, as you said, were complete flips of biomes. And are there some other lessons that we can take into perhaps with the micronutrients or macronutrients or these new patterns that we can take into other domains? I mean, when you saw these, what domains could we take that thinking into? This sort of longer term, wow, that's a major shift. Any thoughts from any of you on that? I'm going to throw this out to you. Are you stumping? Bad question or... Okay, we're going to let that sit. All right, boom. Okay, over here, a much better question is going to come now. How's that? Yeah.
Gregory Tutton with the Diplomatic Corps of the Order of Malta. So one thing to highlight as a comment, we now have at the Human Rights Council up at the Palais here in Geneva, as of spring 2022, there is a new human right that's recognized by the General Assembly and all the member states to food security within climate change. So we already had a right under the original charter for food security and a right to food, but now there's specifically a reference as an adjudicable, legally litigatable right to food security under climate change. So in the light of that, I'm wondering two things. One from Professor Marks, what's the nutritional density impact when these plants have undergone desiccation? Is there a potential problem, thinking of what Namha and Anisha have mentioned about the importance of nutritional density? Is there another trade-off on nutrition? There might not be. And then number two, one thing we've looked at a lot, because with the Order of Malta we have projects in about 120 countries, many of which involve food security, almost all of which fundamentally come down to soil health. So what is the link between soil health and desiccation, or between the microbial activity in the soil and the initiation of a desiccation process?
So you made up for my bad question with two good ones. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So nutrition and then soil health. Yeah. Nutrition first and soil health.
Sure. So with regards to nutritional shifts in plants that undergo desiccation, the main shift that we see is an upregulation of secondary compounds that are produced as defense mechanisms for the plants. But these can be polyphenols and antioxidants, various different compounds. And so they don't fit exactly in the nutritional bucket, but we do find that there's actually a number of resurrection plants that have long-standing traditional medicinal uses because of these secondary compounds that they produce that are very healthy and in our own bodies, even though, of course, the plant is making it for itself. In terms of seeing if, for example, maize were to change its nutritional profile after the addition of a resurrection gene, we're just not at that point yet. But I would assume that you will get more of these antioxidants and secondary compounds after a plant experiences desiccation.
Great, thank you for that. Now we're on to soil health. Now you look like you wanted to say something. Aisha, I'd love to hear you.
Yeah, I would say that when plants are under stress, one common reaction is to produce anthocyanin, which belongs to the category of antioxidant that Rose talked about. So in that respect, maybe eating stress plants will give you a higher antioxidant level, right? But you have to consider about the entire productivity, right? When we are talking about plants, we are talking about harvestable part. We are not eating the leaves. The leaves can accumulate anthocyanin, but we'll be eating, you know, the soybean, protein from the soybean, or the rice grains.
But I think you're talking about soil health, because we've talked so often about what's above the zero, and I think you're referring to what's below the zero, and we're being ground level. And when we think about the future, especially when we're looking at food security, with our soils becoming unhealthy through monocrop, monoculture, pesticides, fertilizers, and where do we see what anticipate with this?
Well, there's already work being done. For example, in Granada, there's a group of Spanish scientists isolated bacteria that can produce stress hormones of plants, abscisic acid, and they can confer onto olive trees some degree of drought tolerance. So I think further understanding of the microbial community and how they interact with one another and forming a community itself will be important going forward for food security purposes.
Aisha, are you all doing anything with soil health?
I'm just resonating with what Nam said regarding sort of creating these autonomous microbes that would be able to sort of like a smart organism that would detect what's going on in the soil depending on the region and then sort of augment as it goes along. So that would be very interesting to see in the coming years.
So is this 5, 10, 20 years away where we're going to have these? Or is it right now?
Yeah.
Okay, we're just dreaming at the moment. Okay. What do you think? You're about to say something else.
I think it's a 5 to 10 year time span. I mean, if you look at the literature for human health, there's a microbe called Akamensa that people have isolated and is known to confer many good properties, you know, on human health. So I think that you can extend that kind of finding to plants. But if you're talking about manipulation, you know, you're talking about synthetic biology, you're talking about manipulation of the microbial properties, then you're talking about GMO. I'm sorry to
we'll come back to that. Yeah, exactly.
So,
exactly.
So I think in the end, policy is still important.
Yeah. Okay. Question over here. Yes, sir. And then where's the mic for the next question? It's right here. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I'm Joe Heitman. I'm from Duke University, and I'm co-director of a CFAR program called Fungal Kingdom, Threats and Opportunities. And the panel's already started discussing the microbial world, and I'd like to probe this a little bit further in thinking about mycorrhizal fungi as a real opportunity, both to engineer resilience into crops, but also to make them less dependent on fertilizers that we know we're going to run out of, like phosphorus. And this might be a dialogue that needs to happen between plant biologists and mycologists that focus on fungi.
Thank you for that. I'll take that as planting a thought and not necessarily a question, which is a really great point because we've been talking a lot about up above and all the way up. And so, okay, over here is another question, and who's next after that? I'm looking over there. Good, then I get to ask some. Awesome. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Julio Pau, and I'm 16. That's 1-6, so you're welcome. And taking down the average age here. I'm here on behalf of the Villar Institute. I had a question for you guys, which is, we cannot survive without food. That's obvious. Many young people, and I'm from Europe, so I'm biased, in Europe see their food stores that are full of food, right? And especially non-nutritious foods. So how do we bring about awareness to them of, well, food security in general, that we are having a problem with this, we are running out of food for the population in general, but especially that the foods that they are eating every day are not nutritious enough?
Behavioral change. So we're going to expand the panel to behavioral change. When we're looking at in the food deserts, we even have the food deserts, climate, you know, when we're thinking of this, we're going to have an increasing rate of food deserts occurring with the supply chain, because it's something we haven't really talked about, anticipating supply chain differentiation and availability, which you're referencing. How do y'all see this? It's a big issue for us all over the world. Yeah. Aisha?
Yes.
Go.
Okay.
Please.
So let me flip your question a little bit to something similar that's happening on the other side of the world. There is increasing emphasis on plant-based foods because we want to move a little bit away from overdependence on livestock and sort of animal-based protein. But unfortunately, the malnutrition situation is so dire in such a case that that is not sufficient enough to bridge that gap. So we still have to be confronted with the reality that animal-based protein is still needed in certain areas of sub-Saharan Africa to bridge that gap. But then that doesn't mean we're stopping there. We're looking ahead to begin to have that conversation with young people, with older people, everybody essentially, to say these are the impacts of what livestock farming, for example, is doing to our environment. The change on the farm is not enough. So sort of regenerative livestock farming is not enough. We then have to change our consumption patterns. Unfortunately, behavior change is very slow. It's very painful, and it's prone to regression, but that is something that has to happen. In addition to that, we also need signaling from policymakers, because when you have a government that is signaling and being serious when it comes to shifting away and then moving into more nutritious processes, whether it is in school feeding situations or residential areas. So when you have that signaling from policymakers, it then begins to send market system stressors. So the market has to win somewhere. So if plant-based foods are available and they're cheap, the market will go for it.
It's an interesting question, very difficult one, frankly, I think, probably for us sitting here to answer. And thank you for asking that. Just as thank you for asking the one about the oceans. Because in a panel of 4 people who are brilliant, you can't actually answer everything, and it's good to bring those things out. Perhaps someone online has some great answers for this one as well, because this is being streamed. You know, for me, one of the things is we're coming towards the last 5-6 minutes of our time together. I'm going to ask each of you what's the question you wish I would have asked you in this past hour, or you wish you would have heard that you didn't hear when relating to our topic today, which is anticipating, looking forward with climate resilience and food security? Is there something I should have asked you? Matthias, you're either nodding your head because you're being polite, or you have something you'd like to ask.
No, I think it's a great prompt. I think one question that is really hard to tackle is how do we deal with these issues at the systemic level? And I'm also mindful of the audience, pointing to geopolitics as a backdrop to all of this, both food security, supply chains, but also climate and climate security. And the need for more proactive engagement at that level, I believe, is clearly there when the prospects are, as they are at the systems level, potential of systems breakdowns in the climate system, and also the potential for unilateral interventions in the climate systems. And that, I think, to me, is a clear need for more anticipation, more foresight, which does address these systems and their interdependencies and builds a foundation for global governance, because that's sorely lacking, at least in my area of climate interventions.
Great. Thanks, Matthias. What about, Rose, what about you? Is there something I should have asked you that I haven't, or you wish you would have been asked from the audience?
Sure. Well, it's been an amazing conversation, and I think we've touched on a lot of very important things. One area that we didn't explore very extensively today is agroecology and ecological restoration, and how we can use our understanding of plant resilience to design and utilize more natural systems to get our food source, and why these are important in terms of providing ecological stability and therefore ecosystem services. And I would like to see the field as a whole really explore this, as opposed to sort of this more targeted look at specific crops and how we can get our calories. But how can we design agricultural systems that are in and of themselves resilient and sustainable through the diversity and mimicking natural ecology?
Great. Thank you for that. Aisha, what about you? Is there something I should have asked you I didn't?
No, we've asked quite a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But just writing on what Rose said, that everyone in this room, we need to begin to think of an ecosystem approach. So it's not just the science in the middle of it, it's also what infrastructure is needed for this innovation to thrive outside of the lab, what sort of financial structure is needed for this, and sort of what sort of frameworks do we need in the global discussion.
Thank you. Frameworks. And finally, for you, sir?
Well, in the beginning, I mentioned that humanity is reliant on 4 major food crops, right? So I think going forward, we need to diversify our food sources, eating more minor food crops like quinoa. See that we serve quinoa here. In the States, quinoa has become a more regular staple, eating more beans, which is good for your health. So I think that diversification of food sources is very important going forward.
Okay. That's really great for all of you. Thank you for that. Now, this is truly my last question now. I believe in amplifying the positive. We can always talk about lots of things we should be doing. Is there an example that you would like to share with this group and those who are online, for those afterwards who are watching this online, of a project or a paper or a book or something which you would like to suggest that we should really take a look at? Say on Monday, when we have time to go take a look. It can be you name it, and we'll note it. What would it be? A piece of homework. I'm at the university. I can't help myself. Come on, give us a piece of homework. Who wants to give me one?
Well, I just read a paper before coming here that was published in the journal Cell by multiple authors on addressing microbiome of everything, and that includes plants, animals. So I think that would be an interesting paper to read.
The microbiome of everything.
Yeah, well,
very precise paper.
Well, I kind of summarized the title, but all you want to know about microbiome, but afraid to ask.
It sounds like how I got through my first 2 years of university. Yes, that's sort of okay. Aisha, what about you? What's a project, something that you really want everyone to have read or looked at?
Project. This is actually a project we are working on at Sahel Consulting, and it is centered around cassava and talking about diversifying our food production. So it's called Basics. It's a short form, and it's building a sustainable cassava production system, and it's active in Nigeria and Tanzania. So have a read to understand what, you can Google it, understand what's going on in that sector and why cassava is so important and what sort of innovation is going on in there.
Great. Wonderful project to take a look at. Matthias, what about you?
Yeah, mine is both an institution and a way of conducting collaborative research all over the world. And the institution is the Degrees initiative, which is funding researchers in all continents.
What's the name of it again?
Degrees. So as in like degrees of warming climate.
Okay, so I thought you said, I wasn't quite sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Degrees. Yeah.
It's also an acronym, I forget. But
yep.
And basically bringing together young researchers all over the world with more experienced researchers in the field of climate interventions to empower them enter the field and to fund them directly. For this collaboration, and so to plant the seeds of future advisors all over the world that can help make global decisions on this issue.
Fantastic, thank you. Another excellent one. And last but not least, Rose?
Well, I don't really like to give out homework unnecessarily, and
this is not unnecessary. They have to do this now.
And
the ticket for next year, they don't do it.
I'm afraid it might come across as arrogant, but I'd really like to recommend that you all take a look at one of my own papers from 2023, which is called A Critical Analysis of Plant Science Reveals Ongoing Inequities, which is quite a mouthful as a title. But in this paper, we summarized the past 20 years of research in plant science by analyzing 300,000 papers that were published over the past 2 decades. And we describe patterns of global participation, gender equality, and the different crops and plant species that are studied in different nations. And I'd really urge you to take a look at this because I think it drives home the points that we've been making about including everyone in the conversation and how local priorities may differ across the globe.
Fantastic. That's really, thank you. That's really, it's okay that it's your paper. That's really wonderful. I want to thank all of you for being very open, for going with us and engaging in a topic which is very important for all of our future and future generations, not just survival, but thrival. I think this is really important. It's been an amazing journey. And I hope you've enjoyed it as well. Thank you all very much for choosing to be here this morning. Thank you for being here online. Don't forget, you can always continue to have the conversation here with the hashtag GESDA Summit. It's always there. And immediately afterwards, I think there's a moment to go up into the globe to have some refreshments after this. So thank you all very, very much, and I wish you a great rest of GESDA. Let us thank our panel in the usual way. Thank you.